Vladimir Putin are holding their first summit in Helsinki, Finland. The two leaders will be meeting in a capital city that is well accustomed to hosting high-level US, Russia and US Soviet summits. The summit is a potential political minefield at home for the US president, but a geopolitical win for his Russian counterpart. Neither side expects major breakthroughs from the talks in the Finnish capital beyond warm words, an agreement to begin repairing battered US-Russia relations, and maybe a deal to start talks on issues such as nuclear arms control and Syria. The two men, who have praised each other's leadership qualities from afar, could also agree to start restocking their respective embassies and returning confiscated diplomatic property. It follows a wave of expulsions and retaliatory action prompted by the poisoning of a former Russian spy in the UK. Well, for more on this story, we cross to our correspondent, Lucy Taylor, who's in Helsinki for us. Thanks very much for joining us, Lucy. So the two men are meeting. Any idea what they're discussing right now?
Well, the meeting, we're told, is running slightly late, but within the next hour or so they will be discussing, and no, the answer to your question is no, we don't know what they're discussing. This will be a private meeting with just the two men and their translators, the first meeting, and it's an unstructured agenda, so there's no set agenda for topics to discuss. They can take in any global issues affecting the two countries which these two leaders feel fit to raise. We have a good idea of what they might discuss. For example, Russia said the focus would be on the conflict in Syria, probably Ukraine, the Korean Peninsula as well. And of course, there's been a lot of pressure on Donald Trump to raise the investigation into alleged election interference, which Russia has always denied. So a lot of fairly difficult and tricky topics for the two leaders to discuss, but both sides say just getting them to sit down together, just restarting the dialogue between them is an achievement in itself.
How do you think perhaps people in the US will read the meeting? Because obviously Mr. Putin is not exactly the flavor of the month there.
No, and I think it makes interesting timing, the fact that on Friday we had new criminal charges against 12 Russian nationals, which the US says are intelligence officers, in that investigation into alleged election interference. So people will have that at the forefront of their minds, along with some of the other examples of what the US has called bad behavior over the last few years. So, for example, Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, which the US still has sanctions against Russia on that issue. So, yeah, that probably it could be said that Russia may have more to gain from this. On the other hand, though, Donald Trump has tweeted this morning saying that he is looking forward to the meeting. He said that he feels that the deterioration in the relationship over the last few years, he said that at the moment the relationship between the US and Russia is the worst it's ever been, but he pinned that on previous administrations, on his own country. He blamed the US for the deterioration of relations between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Here in Russia, I think people are quite pleased to be having this meeting. They feel that it improves Russia's standing in the world. It kind of feeds into a narrative in Russia that Moscow, Beijing and Washington DC are the centres of the world over some of the other prominent Western countries, the European Union, for example, or the United Kingdom. So I think people here in Russia will be fairly pleased with this meeting, but both sides, I think, have low expectations of any big deals or big decisions being made today. It's very much a preliminary meeting between these two men.
And on a lighter and more economic point, how do the Russians feel that they performed in terms of hosting the World Cup? And are they hopeful that they're going to get more in terms of tourism going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Russia is, I think, delighted with how the World Cup has gone. Not all absolutely perfect, but certainly ran very smoothly in comparison perhaps to some of the reports or fears before the tournament began, when people were speaking about security fears, about fears about how foreigners were going to be welcomed. For example, would there be examples of racism or homophobia against football fans? There haven't been many or any public examples of those. There was a small breach in security, or perhaps you might say a big breach in security last night at the World Cup final, when a pitch invasion happened. 4 people protesting Russia's politics burst onto the pitch during the World Cup final with President Vladimir Putin watching on. So that was a kind of blip in the image of this World Cup so far, but I think ordinary Russians are very pleased. And Vladimir Putin has announced that any football fans who came here with tickets, with those fan IDs, which were the identity documents that instead of visas, people could come in if they had a fan ID, which they got when buying a ticket. Those will be extended to the end of the year. So he's clearly hoping to encourage more tourism from those football fans over the next few months, and hoping that they'll go home and tell their friends how Russia is and change the image of Russia in the world.
Indeed. All right, Lucy, thank you very much for your time. That was our correspondent in Helsinki. Well, she's actually in Russia, reporting on that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin meeting that's going to take place shortly. After a short break, we'll have more news for you.